Hey YouTube, welcome back to our channel. My name is Elena.
And I'm Bjorn.
And we are Viking Age reenactors and living historians here to talk with you about your favorite Viking shows.
Today we're taking a look at Vinland Saga, episode 10.
Alright, I'm gonna say the same thing about Ragnarok here as I did when we were watching the Vikings show. It's interesting that they're always alluding to these characters thinking that the time of the Vikings has come, the time of Ragnarok has come, everything like that. First of all, we don't exactly know 100% whether they were always expecting Ragnarok to happen. All of these shows kind of allude to that, and it always seems a little bit silly to me.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of Ragnarok being just this metaphorical end of days kind of thing that's comparable to Revelations or whatever other kind of thing you want to. That's not how it is. You know, I understand the whole, symbolic gesture of saying, oh, they're in their twilight, so it's just like Ragnarok. But, I mean, to them, the myths aren't myths. It's just what's going to happen. It's part of how the world works. And Ragnarok is very clearly states in Volspo and everything that Ragnarok begins with 3 years of winter. Among other things, to say the least. So, the obvious fact that they're not 3 years deep in winter, it's inarguable. It's just, nope. It's not Ragnarok, sorry.
Actually, it's springing off of that because we're talking a little bit about mythology here. So the other thing, the other trope that shows up a lot in these TV shows is the whole concept of going to Valhalla if you die in battle. That's been a belief of the modern day of how they would have thought back then for the longest time is if a Viking went into battle or a Norseman and died by the sword or by an axe or by a spear, and that was the only way that he was able to get into Valhalla. There are multiple trains of thoughts about this, but that's not necessarily how we 100% believe that they thought back then. Because first of all, even according to mythology, if you died in battle, there was a chance that you would get picked by a Valkyrie. So Valkyries were the ones that, first of all, picked the warriors that were the most capable off the battlefield, and they were the ones. Yeah, and they were the ones that made the choice out of the dead soldiers on the field. They made the choice of who got to ascend to possibly Valhalla, first of all. So there was a chance that you died in a battle and you weren't even picked by a Valkyrie to ascend to the Great Hall. And even if you were picked to go into this afterlife, Odin was not the first one that got a say in who he got to choose. It was actually Freya that then got to choose half of those warriors for her army. And then the other half would go to Odin. So to get into Valhalla, you basically had to be chosen by a Valkyrie and then be rejected by Freya.
Burn.
They were Freya's rejects.
Burn. Ultimate burn. I can imagine the insults being thrown back and forth across the halls.
So that's if we go specifically by the mythology that we know of, technically, literally, that was the order of things. And then on top of that, you also have to kind of think about, if you did make it into Valhalla, what was your life like? Well, you woke up and you went and you fought and you died, and then you went and had a grand old feast and you drank a bunch, and then Supposedly. And then you went to sleep, and then you woke up, and you did the same thing over and over again. Now, to me, I don't know about you guys, but to me, that sounds a lot like purgatory. Many arguments could be made about that. Some people will say that that is the optimal afterlife that they want to have. But there are arguments to be made that Valhalla was not this glorious thing that every warrior wanted to go to, and not something that pushed men into battle because they wanted to die this death and go to Odin's Hall.
Yeah, exactly. There's more of an emerging thought that would kind of showcase like the importance that was held amongst like family burials and things. And so really the ideal kind of thing would be able to, see your families and your loved ones in the afterlife and continue on that way. And there's this idea that Valhalla and kind of getting to Valhalla was sort of like a consolation prize for dying overseas and not getting to spend your afterlife with your family, because you weren't able to be buried in like a family plot. Your body was never able to be brought back home, essentially. And so despite that, to make it more of like a thing, hey, that kind of sucks, but you get to hang out with Odin or Freya or something. Hey. To make it a little bit more enjoyable. There's also this idea that combats this whole notion of what we think of Valhalla. Whereas, like you said earlier, it's you wake up, you fight all day, and then you get torn apart, and then at night you're put back together magically, and then you go into the hall and feast and drink and eat and do whatever you want. And that's not really like the mentality that this theory promotes. So it's basically the idea that and we see this reflected in various different sagas. I don't even want to start to quote any specifically, but there's various examples as you read the sagas of people who are living going into their like family graves, and either to loot or for whatever various reasons, and they actually encounter the dead in the graves there, like in their burial. So there's this idea that the fighting that happened all day actually took place in the grave mound itself, and then they'd cross through a threshold or like a portal in the grave to enter Valhalla, and Valhalla was more of like a rallying point where people would kind of gather after the fact, and so it was more of like this kind of solemn idea, I guess, of these warriors kind of doing it, and it is more of like a gathering place or something, not where they would live specifically. They would kind of live in their graves, but then they would all like conglomerate and meet up at Valhalla.
Definitely different theories that are going around. Obviously, we can't know 100% whether one is correct or not. It could be that there was this glory to going to Valhalla, and that's where warriors ended up, and that's why they went into battle and everything like that. So
yeah, I mean, it definitely would have been like an honorable thing, absolutely, sure. It's definitely not something to like skim by, but
yeah,
there's pros and cons to all of it.
Exactly. Exactly. I just want to bring forward the different theories that are going around, because I find that a lot of these TV shows, and now this one as well, promote the same theory of warriors going into battle yelling for Valhalla, thinking that they're all going to get in, and we're pretty sure that that's not how it worked.
So an interesting fact is that Thorkel supposedly actually took young Canute out on raids and like showed him the way of being a Viking. So it's just kind of interesting that, instead of having Thorkel on their side of all figures to choose, he's the one like laying siege to young Canute. Mm-hmm. And I just think it's interesting. So I'm curious to see now that they've like captured him, if he's gonna like show him how to be a proper Viking warrior, or if they're just gonna use him as a bargaining chip or something. I don't know. Just an interesting point I wanted to make. And then also earlier in the very end of the last episode was that King Sven was like kind of shit talking Canute's like Christian upbringing, saying like, oh, maybe that's what made him all soft and we got to teach him how to be a thing. But what's interesting about that is that Sven's father is Harold Bluetooth, who notoriously was not only a very proud Christian, but also Christianized all of Denmark. So I just find it very strange that Harold Bluetooth's son would be talking about how raising somebody as a Christian make them all weak and whatever else. Because at this point in like the early 11th century, most Vikings would have been Christianized, or most of the Scandinavian region would have been Christianized. So
that's one of the big I don't want to say misconceptions, but something that gets overlooked a lot is, especially toward the later Viking age, such as what we are right now, we're in what year 1013 it said. Mm-hmm. there were Christian Vikings. A lot of people, when they say Viking, they mean heathen Scandinavians, but toward the later age, there were a lot of Christians that were still going a Viking.
Oh, yeah.
And that's something that gets overlooked a lot in conversation, I feel like.
Yeah, because Viking is not a byname for heathen warrior. A Viking was just a raider. It was a pirate. You can still be Christian and go a Viking. It didn't change anything.
Exactly.
It was a profession. It was a part of their society.
It's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. I feel like because people want to make that separation between, the good Christian and then the raiding heathen, basically. But that's not how reality works. It's not black and white. There was a lot of gray area in between. And I feel like a lot of TV shows and this show as well is showing a lot of that. We get to see it with The Last Kingdom because our main character is basically passed around from Christians to heathens his entire life, and he kind of tries to choose his own identity in where he finds himself, and he chooses heathenry as a result. But there is a lot of that gray area where Christians made friends with heathens, and heathens fought against heathens, and there was a lot of that. And in this show as well, we have Vikings fighting against Vikings, and that was the reality of it. It wasn't just Christians against heathen Vikings. You could be a Viking and be a Christian, or you could be, a heathen that had nothing to do with it in the first place. So there was a lot of gray area and a lot of overlap that happened there that a lot of people don't really take into account.
Yep. The other big aspect of this episode was the fall of Rome in England. What got me with this is that in the show, Askeladd was saying that the Britons forced Rome out and defeated them, when that kind of wasn't. I feel like it's an oversimplification. By and large, England was a very extreme north outpost for the Roman Empire, and it was very understocked, and Rome had much bigger issues than maintaining presence on a relatively small island, and those bigger issues were the fall of Rome. So they withdrew their presence and kind of left whatever warriors there, that famous legion, stranded. But by and large, Rome left because they had bigger issues like preserving Rome. The outpost in England was abandoned and left to its own devices, and then the natives eventually were able to push back because there were no reinforcements coming, so they could do whatever. The fun thing that I actually learned relatively recently is that with additional pressure from other Celtic tribes in the area, the native Britons invited the Angles and the Saxons to England to help fight off those other instigators after Rome had left. And then the Angles and the Saxons just liked it there so much that they stayed and then killed everybody else. That's all the time that we have for tonight. Unless there was anything else that anybody wanted to talk about, but I don't think so. Unless you want to talk about this cute little kitten.
Thank you guys so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you can be notified of our future videos. And we'll see you in the next one.